So, guys, yesterday we have discussed the basic concept of a filter, what is filter, why we need filter, what are the different types of a filter, how the filters are executed, what is the default filter execution order, as well as we have also discussed the built-in authorized attribute, right? So how the built-in authorized attribute work with the basic authentication, work with role-based authentication. That is what we have discussed in our yesterday session. So today what we are going to discuss, first of all, we will start the custom authorization, then we will discuss the resource filter, and then we will discuss the action filter. So basically three important filters we are going to discuss in today's session. So let us start the session with the custom authorization filter. So what is a custom authorization filter? Then the question that should comes to your mind, we have already the authorized attribute, then why we need, when we need a custom authorization filter? What are the different ways to implement a custom authorization filter? Can you explain the use of a custom authorization filter with some layman understandable example? Can you provide some real-time scenarios, right, in our application development where we need to use custom authorization filter, right? See, guys, remember, implementation is not that important. Implementation is very easy. You can find the code right from internet from here and there, but deciding right whether to use custom authorization attribute or not, what are the real time scenarios so that you can take the decision by yourself, that is important. So let us first understand what is custom authorization filter, the why we need custom authorization filter with some layman understandable example, and then we'll see how to implement this in our ASP.NET Core Web API application. So before understanding custom authorization filter, so out of all the filter, guys, remember we have a five different kind of filter. One is authorization, resource, action, result, and exception. Out of these five filter, which filter will execute fast? It is the authorization filter, right? Authorization filter means this is the filter which is going to execute fast, and after this filter, rest of the filter will come into the picture. So this filter, why it execute fast? Because right, so basically, whenever the client send a request, before doing anything, first we need to identify whether that client is a valid client or not, whether that client has permission to access that endpoint or not. So this is first, this is important. So if we are not doing this and if we are executing other things, right, right, result filter, action filter, resource filter, and then you came to know that yes, this user doesn't have permission, I did not return any response. That means you have already executed all these things. Your processor resources are used, your CPU resources are used, then right, then you are going to decide I am not going to right return the response rather than I'm going to return some error. That makes sense. So if it is invalid request, from the step one we should inform the client instead of processing and returning invalid response. So this is the filter which is coming into the picture, right? Or you can say this is the first filter, earlier one in our HTTP request processing pipeline, which is going to execute, right? And the framework have already provided the authorized attribute, which is going to handle this thing. That authorized attribute, that built-in authorized attribute, which is provided by the what I can say, ASP.NET Core, uh, handle both the scenarios. Both the scenarios means it is going to check whether the user is, I mean, the user is authorized, user is authenticated. First of all, authentication, that valid token is there, then it is going to check user is authorized. So these two things are going to be handled by the framework. Now what we are going to do is we need to understand some real-time scenarios. And we need to understand how the built-in authorized attribute will not satisfy that scenario. And for that purpose, we need to use. So simple word, if the built-in authorized attribute does your work, do and ready go and use built-in authorization. If if your requirement is more complex, your requirement is business specific, which is not satisfied by the built-in authorized attribute, then only you need to go with the custom filter. So let us proceed and see some example, right? Suppose one movie cinema hall is there and they are providing some kind of a violent movies, right? And for that movie to be watched, you must be a 18 plus adult, right? So now here we need to check two things, right? That custom authorization filter, right? If you are not using custom authorization filter, if you are only going with the authorized attribute, then he will check only whether you have a token or not. I mean, if you have a ticket or not. But now our requirement is not only we are going to check a valid token, but also we need to ensure the user who is trying to enter into the cinema hall to watch the movie must be a 18 plus. That means that the age calculator we need to check. So that is not possible with the built-in authorized attribute. So what we need to do, we need to create a custom authorization filter. He is not only going to check that you have a valid ticket, but your identity also going to be checked. What is your age? And for that scenario, we need to create a custom authorization filter because here the filtration logic is customized. The filtration logic is as per the business requirement. So it is not the default filtration logic which is going to be handled by the authorized attribute. So this is one of the example of using custom authorization filter. Now, another example, membership authorization. So, for example, you can see nowadays a different e-commerce website, food delivery, they are providing some kind of a membership accessment discount, right? So, for example, one flash sale is going on for 2 hours. One flash sale is going on for 2 hours, and that flash sale is only for the Prime member, or you can say the member who have taken the membership. Now, if you click on this flash sale button, right? Let's assume this is the flash sale button, and you click on this button. And if you are a authorized member, I mean a premium member, or you have taken the membership, then this membership authorization is going to check whether you are having that membership authorization or not. If you are having, then it is going to show you the flash sale items. But at the same time, if you do not have that membership, then what this membership authorization attribute is going to do? It is going to check, right? Do you have a membership authorization in the database? By checking in the database, no, the user doesn't have. Then he will redirect to this page, asking the user to sign in with your membership account, or you can provide one page where the user will navigate and make the payment so that he will become a membership user, and then only he can do the I can then only he can purchase the plus. So basically, in this case, this membership authorization, it is not only checking whether the user is logged in, I mean the user having a valid token or not, but also for this particular endpoint, does this user has a membership? If yes, if the user already taken the membership, that is fine. If the membership is expired, or if the user never taken the membership, then he will redirect it to this page. So this is also one of the custom authorization mechanism. I mean the built-in mechanism will not work because based on the condition we need to decide whether to access this page or whether to return some unauthenticated or you can say forbidden 403 error. So this is also one of the classical example of custom authorization. Clear? If someone asks you when to use custom authorization, can you explain using some layman's term? Now, are you guys able to explain or not?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. See, this is important, right? If you understand the point or concept from the layman's point of view, then implementing this in a project is very easy. So let us proceed and understand how to implement this. I'm going to show you, right? I'm going to give you multiple different kind of examples of custom authorization so that you will get more clarity. So let us proceed and develop one project. Let me create a new project. So once the project is created, next what we need to do, we need to install the appropriate version of a JWT token. So because JWT token is required, So let me go ahead. So as we are using .NET 8, so the right JWT bearer package which is compatible with .NET 8, that what we need to install the latest version of a .NET 8. Okay. Then for generating the JWT token, we need one secret key. So that secret key I'm going to store in the app settings.json file. So I'm going and storing. And I have already shown you how to generate this secret key, right? So for that purpose, you can make use of this website. Just go to the website link and how many bits you need. 32, 64, right? So accordingly, you can generate, right? If you want to show full text, this is. So you can generate the secret token. Then next, what we need to do, we need to configure the JWT into our program.cs class file. And this configuration is required for JWT token validation, right? Whether the token is valid or not. For that purpose, we are going to make use this one, right? So this is my JWT settings. Right from the JWT settings, I have reached the secret key. I'm not going to use camel case, so I'm disabling the camel case. So I'm configuring my authentication scheme, and the default authentication is going to be JWT, and the default authentication challenge, that is how to handle the 401, 403 is this one. And then these are my token validation parameter, how the token is going to validate it. Do I need to validate the issuer and the audience? No. Do I need to validate the sign-in key? Yes. The key which is used for creating the token, this key, that key must be used for validating the token. So this information we have. And here, this use authorization attribute or middleware component must come before. See, this authentication comes first, then we need to implement the authorization because this makes sense, right? So we need to first check whether the user is a valid user or not. Then only we need to check whether the user, whether the authenticated or valid user has permission access the endpoint. That should come next, right? So this is our token configuration. Next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a folder at the root directory where I'm going to store all the users. So models folder. So within the models folder, I'm going to create a class file named user.cs. This class file is going to hold all the properties of a user. I'm going to show you different examples. So I'm creating this one with multiple examples. So department, right? For example, I want to create some endpoint which is going to be accessible by specific department. Subscription level. So basically, whether you are having the subscription or not. So for that purpose, I'm going to check the subscription level and when the whether the subscription expired or not. So these are the different properties I have stored. Based on this, I'm going to create some custom authentication filter. Next one is login DTO. So this DTO is going to store the information which is required for generating a token. So basically the username and a password. So that username and password we are going to store here. So here you can see login DTO, which is going to contain the email and the password. So this email we are storing. If you are storing username, then that in that case you need to take the username. That's fine. So next, what I need to do, I need to create my user store. So basically, I'm not going to work with the database to make the thing simple because we have already discussed how to work with the database. So that part you can enhance. So in this case, I'm creating some in-memory data store. So in this case, this is going to my user store table. You can consider the user store table. So in this table, so this property is going to contain list of a user. So I can access user store dot user similar to your database context dot users right visit property. So here user store dot users, which is going to give me the all the active users, right? All the users which are stored. So here ID is unique. You can see then also, right, you can see I am storing the email ID, password, subscription level, subscription expire on, and the department, right? Different data I have stored here. Next, what I need to do, I need to create my authentication controller, which is going to generate the token based on the username and the password. So go to the controllers folder, create a class file. So you can create a controller, API controller, you can create a class file, and then you can also convert that class file into a controller. That is also possible. So let me go ahead. So this is very simple. So I'm taking the eye configuration. Why I'm right taking the eye configuration instance? Because I need to access this key. So to access this key, I need the configuration instance. That what I'm initializing through constructor. This is my login endpoint, which is taking the login detail as input. Login detail, if you look, it is taking the username, I mean email and the password. So based on this email and the password, I'm checking this data whether it is the corresponding email and password matched with any user or not within this user store dot users property. So that is what I'm doing here. User store dot users property first or default. I'm checking the provided email and password. Does it match with any user? If yes, then return that user. If not matched, then we need to return unauthorized invalid username and the password. Right? If the username and password is matched, right, then what we need to do? We need to click right, create the claims. So here you can see in the claims, I'm storing that name identifier with the email and the subscription level. This is a custom claim. So if the subscription level is provided, that what it is going to store, otherwise it is free. Department, if the user department is provided, that will be stored in the department, otherwise it is going to be not. Then also I'm checking whether that user having the subscription value which is not equals to null. If it is not equals to null, then subscription data we are storing here. Right? This is what we are storing. And one more thing, guys, you need to remember this claim always it is going the key. The key, this is going to be the key, and this is going to be the value. The key and value always going to be in the form of a string. So if you are getting some kind of error, that error might be you are getting because you are trying to store some different type of value. So for example, if I do not provide this two string here, then it might be give me some error, right? So error, why? Because this is not a string value. This is a datetime value. So basically, you have to convert that value into string if you know, right? If you are facing such an error. Then that secret key I'm reading from the config file, and I'm creating my symmetric key by taking this string key. I'm creating my symmetric key, and then I'm creating my credential using this symmetric key and my algorithm. And I'm specifying the token parameters here that issuer audience is null. Claims whatever the claims I want to store in the token. All right, when that claim token is going to be expire. So currently you can see that token validation is 30 minutes, and this is my credential, right, using this key and using this HMAC, that token is going to be generated. So here we are only specifying the information, not generating the token. So when this statement line number 70 is executed, so it will generate the token, and that is the token string you can store here. And that token string, once you retrieve, once you generate, you can return to the user using a JSON object, and that key name is going to be token. So this method, when it's called by the user with proper or valid email and password, it is going to return me the access token. Clear? So this is the things which we have already discussed many times, right? So till now, you should not have any confusion. Clear?
Yes.
Right now. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to discuss so what are the different ways to create custom authorization filter. See, so to create a custom authorization filter, they have provided three approaches. One is authorization filter. So this authorization filter basically, basically used whenever the authorization, the custom authorization code, whatever you are going to use, it is synchronous. Means what? Now that logic, you are not going to deal with any external APIs. You are not going to deal with any database, any other right, third-party services, right? So basically, for that validation, whatever the data required, the data is already available in the token. From the token, you need to take the data and do the validation. Means no external, no IO bound operation, means you have to go with this IO authorization filter. Then this is asynchronous authorization filter. So basically, for implementing, for doing the validation, all the information are not available in the token. Sometimes we need to check with some external services. Sometimes you need to check with the databases. That means whenever the validation required IO operation, then in that case, you have to use this asynchronous authorization filter. So in this case, these are going to be authorization filter. But instead of a filter, right, if you want to create the filter which needs to be worked like an attribute, like authorized attribute, then in that case, what you need to do is you need to inherit your class, right, from the authorized attribute. And this authorized attribute already implemented that authorization, the basic authorization, and you just need to extend or you just need to customize your authorization logic. So all these three approaches I'm going to use. So this is going to be filter, this is filter, but this will be behave like a attribute. So what is the difference between filter and attribute? I will show you practically. But behind the scene, they are going to do the same thing, right? So only the way you are going to apply this filter and this attribute is going to be varied. Otherwise, right behind the scene, all these things are going to be same. So when you are going to implement this authorized attribute, you can implement this on authorization method. You can also implement this on authorization async method, right, as per your requirement. So let us proceed and see how we can implement these three different approaches with three different kind of examples, right? So three different types of scenario I will take into consideration, and using that scenario, I'm going to show you the example. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder with the name filters at the project root directory. So within this filter, I'm going to create all my customer right authorization filter. So let us start with this subscription-based access control, that is authorization filter. So first example, I will show using authorization. The second custom authorization filter I will create using this async authorization filter. Third one I will create using authorized attribute. See, suppose you are developing one e-commerce application, certain APIs, right? Certain APIs like those who are exporting report or who are providing some premium feature, right, should only be available to users with an active premium. For example, the result what we have discussed earlier, right? If you have not a premium customer, then you cannot access that flash sale. So if that is what your requirement, right, then that custom authorization attribute will come into the picture. And that custom authorization attribute not only going to check the subscription level, but also going to check whether that expiration date is valid or not before giving you access, right? So let us proceed and see how we can implement one custom authorization filter, which is going to which is going to restrict access based on the subscription level. See, that you should have a valid token. Without token, nothing is going to be work. After the token is valid, then we need to check, right, whether the user has proper permission subscription level to access the endpoint or not. So for this purpose, let me go ahead and create a class file subscription-based authorization filter. And this is right. This class I'm going to use I authorization filter interface, and I need to override the on authorization method. So let me go ahead and see. See, this is my class file and it must be inherited from authorization filter. So if you go to the definition of authorization filter, then you will see it is having one authorization, unauthorization method, right? And this unauthorization method we need to implement. It is taking the authorization filter context. So using this context object, we can access the route data, we can access the query string parameter, we can access the action method name, right? We can also access the token, right? So everything we can access using this context parameter, right? So now this subscription based authorization filter, we need to make it dynamic. So basically, I have created one array, and that array is going to store the list of allowed subscription, right? For example, if you check here, right, there are a different subscription level, pro, free, premium, right? Out of which level you want to give access for which subscription. For example, in my case, if the user having the pro and premium feature, right, subscription, then he can access the endpoint. If the user having this free subscription, then he cannot access the feature, right? For example, if you look, if you are going with Amazon Prime Video, yeah, MX Player, right? Some of the things they are making available for free, but some other feature, right, you have to pay. Even it is the same in the case of a Hotstar, Geo Hotstar, right? Some features you can access with no cost, and for some other features you need to buy the premium. So how we can handle that things? And for that purpose, I'm going to create. So whichever subscriptions are allowed, so that list of subscription we can pass. And here I'm using params object. So params object means it can accept one or more subscriptions. That what we are going to store inside this allowed subscriptions parameter. Now, so this method we need to override, and this method, not override, we need to provide implementation. And this is the context object parameter. Using this context object parameter, we can access the everything, right? So first of all, you know, once the user is authenticated. So once the user is authenticated, that context object, right, http context dot user object is created, and inside that user object, right, many user related informations are stored along with the claims information. Now, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I will access the user object. And inside this user object, I'm checking whether the user is already authenticated or not. If the user is already authenticated, right, guys, remember this part, this validation part you can skip. This validation part you can skip if you are using the authorize attribute, right, additionally. But now what is my requirement? I'm not going to use the authorize attribute anymore. So that authentication and authorization, right, everything is going to be handled by this one. So here, if the user identity is authenticated, if the user is authenticated, right, then what I need to do? I need to use return, I need to return this custom error message. So if you don't want to return any custom error message, then you can skip this part, right? But my requirement is I want to return a custom error response if the user is not authenticated. And for this purpose, I'm calling this create JSON helper method. If you go to this, so it is taking the status code, error message, right, error information, and the descriptive error message. So status code, it can be 401, 403. Error means unauthorized, forbidden, and message means the human readable message. So this is my JSON payload, and I'm returning a JSON object by passing this JSON payload with the status code, this one, JSON result. And this is what it is returning. That is what we will return to the client if the user is not authenticated. And I'm calling this return method means no further processing, short circuiting, right? From here only, it will return to the client. Clear? Yes.
Yes.
Right. Next, what we need to do? We need to check whether the user subscription available or not, right? So once we have the user, right? Once we have the user object, and if you look at the user object, so what are the claims we are storing? We are storing subscription label, we are storing department, and we are storing the subscription expire on. So now we need to fetch this claim information. So here you can see I'm fetching the subscription label. So from the context object, right? I mean from this HTTP context data user object, from the claim, I can get the subscription level, I can get the subscription expire on. So in this case, guys, remember, in this case, whatever data required for the validation purpose, whatever data is required, those data already stored in the claim. Do I need to make any IO operation?
No.
No. So if there is no IO operation, I mean, there is no database operation, no external API, then you have to use authorization filter, not authorization async filter, right? So that is what we are doing. So first of all, we are checking the subscription label value. We are fetching the subscription expire value. And first of all, whatever the subscription label we are getting for this particular user, is this subscription label allowed or not? That what we need to check here. So within the allowed subscriptions array, we need to check is this allowed or not. If it contains, that is fine. If it not contains, then in that case, we need to return 403 forbidden error. Clear? Yes.
Yes.
Right. Now, let assume the subscription label is available and that is valid. Prime is there or Pro is there. That is available, that is valid. So if that is valid, so we cannot give guarantee that that a subscription is not yet expired. So if the subscription is not expired, then only we will access. Even though you are a pro user, but your subscription is expired. So in that case, what we need to do, we also need to check the expire time. So if the expire time is not equals to null, if the expire time convertible to a date time, and if the expire time is greater than current date time, then that is valid. Otherwise, what we need to return? Again, we need to return unauthorized. And anywhere, if we have not execute this return statement, means what? Means it will execute the next filter or the action method, whichever registered into the request processing pipeline. Clear? Yes. Any question? Any question, guys, related to this custom authorization filter, subscription based authorization filter? Yes or no?
No, sir.
Okay, fine. Now, so if someone asks you when to use I authorization filter instead of a IASing authorization filter, can you able to answer yes? So you should know whenever the authorization logic, the custom authorization logic doesn't involve any IO operation, then in that case we need to go with the I authorization filter. Clear? Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Okay. Right. Now, the next what I'm going to discuss document level data restriction using C. Guys, remember here, I'm not going to do any kind of database kind of operation, but you should have a very clear picture that when to use AE async authorization filter and when to use I authorization filter. Now, what I'm going to show you how to make use of this I async authorization filter, right? So basically, right, in an internal HR system, right? Suppose you are working in a company, that company having its own portal, and the portal which is provided to you is going to be different than the HR department. So HR can have more access. Now they want to be review the salary or they want to review the performance, right? That means for that purpose, whatever endpoint it needs to be accessed, that is going to be department wise. If someone working in the HR department, then they can access such endpoints. If not, then they should not access, right, those information. So for this purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a department authorization filter. And this time I'm going to show you how to use IASync authorization filter. See, let me go ahead and create this one, department authorization filter. So let me go ahead and create a class file, department authorization filter within the filters folder. And this time it is going to implement IASing authorization filter. This is the same private method what I have used in subscription based. Right here also I'm putting the same thing. If you want, you can create a helper class with helper method and call that this method. That is also fine. So now allowed department. So whichever department are allowed, right? That the department list we are accepting as an input parameter similar to this allowed subscription. And here authorization async. So here IASing authorization filter means you can see, sorry, go to definition. So here you can see all authorization async method that what we need to implement. And that is what we are doing here, implementing on authorization. And it is a synchronous method, so you have to use async and the task return time. So doing the same thing, right? Getting the user context, validating whether the user is valid or not. If user is invalid, we are returning this error message. Retrieving the department. See, in this case, right, as I'm not using, right, as I'm not using any kind of what I can say, database access, but in real time, right, for example, if you are not storing this department information in the token, right, you are not storing the department. So in that case, what you need to do, you need to paste the email ID. Similarly, like this, you will paste the email ID. And using this email ID, you can paste the corresponding department data from the database in a asynchronous manner, right? And once you paste the department data, you need to check whether the department is null. If it is null, then you need to return this error message. If the department is not available within the allowed department list, then also you need to return this error message. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Right? And as we are using asynchronous method, so you have to call this a task, rate a task that a completed task, indicate that this method execution is completed, so that you can proceed further. Right, further means you go ahead and execute the remaining filter or the action method. So this is where, right, I have written this way. I have not used any asynchronous code here, but you have to use, right? For example, if this is already available in the claim, then for this purpose, no need to use this asynchronous filter. You can go with the authorization filter. But let's assume the scenario, right? Based on the email, you have to paste the data from the database. Then only you need to use asynchronous filter. Clear? Yes. Right. Any question, guys? No question. Next, right? Next, what I need to do is see in this case, these two what I have created, they are behave like a filter. But that authorize attribute, what we are using in our controller, that is a attribute. Now, can I create some custom authorization filter which is going to behave like an attribute? Yes, that is also possible. So for that purpose, what we need to do, we need to create that filter inherited from the authorized attribute. So let us see how we can do this. Right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that time-based API access. Time-based API access means what? Now, for example, you are developing some sensitive application like banking application. And as you know, bank is open from 9 to 6. And so that is what means 9 to 6. So basically, you need to develop some API endpoint or resources which needs to be accessed only during the active hours, during the business hour from 9 to 6 p.m. Before 9 a.m. or after 6 p.m., if someone trying to access this API endpoint, it should not process. Clear? What is my requirement? Yes.
Yes.
Right? So for this purpose, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create one filter. So let me go ahead and create the filter. See, in this case, authorize attribute and this unauthorization method, right? It is very similar to this unauthorization method. Now, if you have a question, sir, if the involvement, if this involvement required to be performed, right, some IO operation, then what I need to do? Now, along with this authorized attribute, you have to implement that ISing authorization filter. Basically, whatever the logic you are going to write, that logic involve some IO operation, go with the asynchronous version, otherwise go with this synchronous version, right? So now what I'm doing here, I'm setting these two variable, start hour and end hour. So start hour, the default value is 9, end hour, the default value is 18. So that is what I have set here. Otherwise, right, you can pass some value, right, when the office hour is going to be start and when the office hour is going to be end. That is what you can also specify, but here the default value I have set this one 9 to 6. So now this is my authorization filter. First of all, I'm validating the user is authenticated or not. So what is the current time of the day, local day, right? Date time dot now dot time of the day, that current time I'm retrieving. And then now but hours, right? So current time that hours. Whether this hours is less than the start hour and greater than equals to this end hour. That's what I need to check. If now that hours is less than the start hour and greater than equals to this end hour, so we need to return this error message. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right? So this is my third filter. So basically you can see this is a custom authorization filter, but it will behave like a attribute. So what is the difference? That what I'm going to show you. But here you can use asynchronous filter or authorization filter. That is fine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a demo controller, and then in that controller I'm going to show you how to use this custom authorization filter attribute. So let me go ahead. right? So this is, see, this is my subscription based rate, what I can say, filter. Is this a attribute? No. Is this a attribute? No. If they are not attribute, you cannot apply them like an attribute. So if you go to this HTTP, definitely it will be an attribute class. So by default, it should be inherited from the attribute class. If you go to this type filter, what I have applied here, you can see it is inherited from the attribute class. So the point that what you need to remember, the type which is inherited from the attribute class, that type you can decorate like this. API controller, route, all this. Because everything, if you take this API controller, definitely it will be inherited from the right attribute class, right? So if you go to the controller attribute, it is inherited from the attribute class. But this subscription-based filter, what we created, is this inherited from any attribute class? Go ahead and check. No, it should not be inherited from any attribute class. So we cannot apply that filter like an attribute. So for this purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use something called a type filter and a service filter. So for time being, what is type filter? What is service filter? What is the difference between them? Forget about it. So now what I'm going to use, I'm going to use this type filter to register my custom, custom authentication filter over this endpoint. So this type filter, basically it is a mechanism which allows us to register custom filters to a controller or action method. So in this case, this filter, whatever I have created here, will be applicable to this get premium analytics. So the arguments here, you can see the argument what I'm passing here. These are the arguments. So premium argument, true argument. So basically, if you look at this class filter, so it is taking some arguments, I mean parameters. So this is a param object. Param means any number of argument you can pass, and that param object we are passing here by creating an array, and that array in this case premium and pro. So two values I am passing here. Now, so this method is decorated with the subscription-based authorization filter. That means what? Now, after the validation, see, in this case, if you look at this, then you might be one question, sir, you have not applied the authorized attribute. If you have not applied the authorized attribute, how the authentication will be handled? So here, we understand this unauthorized method will execute and this will do this thing. But before it, where the user context object is going to be set. So that what logic we have not written here, and we have not applied that authorized attribute or even here. Then how it is going to be handled? Now that is going to be handled because we have already configured that default authentication is going to be JWT bearer. So if you apply authorized attribute, that is fine. If you do not apply, then also that is fine. So now, if you apply authorized attribute here, that will work. If you don't apply, that will work, right? Why? Because the default authorization logic is going to be this one. So now, this filter will execute before executing this action method. Similarly, that salary review and at this endpoint, I want to ensure only accessible by the employer user who belongs to the HR department. That HR argument I'm passing here. So this method needs to be executed right by the, uh, this endpoint needs to be executed between 6 a.m. to 9, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So for that purpose, right, I'm using, right, and here you can see this is a filter. This is a filter. I am using type filter to register the custom action filter. But in this case, this business hour attribute, is this a attribute? Yes, it is a attribute. Why? Now this is inherited from the authorized attribute. And if you look at the authorized attribute, it is inherited from the attribute class. So as it is a attribute, right? This is attribute. I can directly apply that attribute here. Clear? So what is the difference you understand? So if you are inheriting from the attribute class, then it will be behave like attribute. Otherwise, it will be behave like a filter. In case of filter, you have to use either type filter or service filter to register the custom filter. Clear or not? So what is type filter? What is service filter? What is the difference between them? I will take one session and I will explain that in detail. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So this is a type filter, so we can use in controller level or the action level only.
Controller level you can apply. That is fine. So here, if you apply the type filter, it will be like this.
Okay, sir.
So see, I have already discussed there are three ways, right? Globally and basically global. See, whenever we are working with a filter are not meant for global. For you can apply, but ideally not required. Why? Because if it is globally better to go with the middleware component. But if it is not right, and the filter will come into the picture only at the action level. Action level means if you are going to apply that filter to all the action method, apply that on the controller level. Otherwise, you can apply on the specific action method level. Clear?
Yes, clear. Thank you.
Right now. Now with these changes, right, to let us proceed and see whether I'm able to access the endpoint. Okay. Premium analytics. Let me go ahead and access this endpoint. So I'm getting unauthorized. Authentication is required to access this resource, right? So if you take this one, and even if you pass this one from here, right, then also you will get the same error, right? Unauthorized access. Why? Because currently we are not passing any, right, authentication, I mean token. Now we need to pass the token information. So this is my user store. So this is the user Alicia. So let me go ahead, use that user, right? Alicia is the user. Password is this one. And generate the token. So you can say this is my token. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass that token here and it is going to execute. So welcome to Premium Analytics. Right. Similarly, we are having another salary review. So salary review endpoint is also there. Let me go ahead and access. Say HR department. Now I'm going to access the support ticket. Right, forbidden. Why? Because you can access in between 9 to 18. Currently it is 719. Right, that is fine. Now, so what I'm going to do is, right, I'm going to use one user who is not belongs to right HR department. So this user, right, he belongs to sales department. So let me go ahead. Okay, let me take this is right Bob. So Bob is also belongs to IT department. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to generate the token. The token generate. So is Bob allowed to access the HR department salary information? Yes or no?
No.
Right? See, he cannot access. This is not possible. And even if you try to access the salary information, that is also not possible. So let me go ahead. So forbidden. Can he access this premium analytics feature? What is the type subscription level? Free. So free means can he access that feature? This endpoint can be accessible?
No.
No. You should
No.
get free. This is working as expected. Clear? If I'm not passing this one, then I'm getting this unauthorized attribute. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Anyone having any question related to how to use custom authentication authorization filter? When to use custom authorization filter? If someone asks you some real-time layman example as well as some real-time scenario, are you able to answer?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
No. So I have also provided some theoretical explanation when built-in authorization attribute are not enough. When authorization depend on external or complex logic. When you need centralized authorization logic, right? When you want to customize authorization failure response or behavior, right? For example, in this case, you can see I'm returning some kind of a custom error message, right? So if that is what your requirement, then also you can use this. Next, what I'm going to discuss, the resource filter, right? Resource filter. So resource filter means what, guys? Remember, resource filters, basically it is a unique and powerful type of a filter. This filter is not available in ASP.NET MVC. It is available in ASP.NET Core Web API. So here, see, authorization filter, they focus on security. Action result filters, they focus on execution flow. Resource filter are all about early resource management, optimization, cleaning, and pre-post processing of request and response. So what exactly it means? It means it is a special type of a filter that allows us to run custom logic very early, right? Very early in the sense. Now, after authorization, guys, remember authorization is the first one. After authorization, this resource filter is going to execute very early and very late. Late means after the result filter. So, if you remember, we have already discussed first authorization filter, then this resource filter, then action filter, then our action method, then result filter, and after the result filter, again this resource filter, if we required, then that is also going to be executed. So basically, this resource filter provide us to execute some custom logic very early and very late. Right? Very early means after authorization. Very late means before, right after the result filter, before sending the result to the customer. Right? If you want to execute some logic, then in that case, you need to execute this resource filter. So what is the use of a resource filter? Resource filter is basically for the resource management. Resource management means they can prepare, manage, and clean up resources. For example, you are going to work with the database. So database connection string, database transaction management, opening the file, implementing caching, right? They can manage all these things. Short circuit, for example, if you are requesting for some data, the data is available in the cache. So this filter can return the data from the cache instead of processing the data in the later stages. So if you want to execute some kind of a pre-processing, post-processing means what? Caching, rate limiting, initial validation, right? So these are the different kind of scenarios or things that what you can implement using a resource filter. So let us try to understand this resource filter with some a layman's point of view, right? Because if you are going to interview and if someone asks you, can you please elaborate a resource filter? So taking, if you know technically that is fine. If he asks, I'm not a programmer, I'm a layman user, right? So can you please explain this concept using layman's term? Then how you will explain? Let us first understand from the layman's point of view, and then I'm going to also discuss three different scenarios, right, with the three different real-time applications. See, suppose you are one of the receptionists at a hotel. So the receptionist who is sitting at the hotel entrance is nothing but a resource filter. Now, so there are two options to be stay in the hotel. One, you are doing the online booking. So where you have provided all your information, Aadhaar card, PAN card, you have selected the room, right? That hotel management application we have already discussed, right? Every information you have provided, you have made the payment, everything is fine. And you come to the hotel and you are say, I have already booked the hotel. This is my ID card, or you can say, this is my rate confirmation mail. So please give me the key. The receptionist will check, yes, your hotel is already booked. So please take the key and go to your room. And at the second time, another user coming, he has not booked the hotel, right? Online, he has not booked the hotel. Then in that case, that manual process is going to be happening. So they will fill the form, they will take the ID card, right? They will ask which hotel room, what type of room you need to be select, what is the cost. Everything is going to be discussed manually. And in that case, after everything is finalized, then they will book the room and they will give the key. So between these two, so in the first case, that resource filter is there. In the second case, the resource filter is also there. But what is the difference? The difference is that the resource filter can take the decision whether to return the response immediately or whether to go with the manual process and return the response. So everything is already there, right? If the response is already with the response filter, he can return the response directly, which is definitely going to improve your application performance. Why? Because that manual process is not there. And if you are doing everything manually, then definitely it is going to take the time. Clear?
Yeah.
Clear or no?
Yes, sir.
Right now. Now let us take another example. Faster. So suppose there is a toll gate and you are going by car. So if your car having the FASTag, then immediately you can go and the amount will be deducted and you can go directly. If the FASTag is not valid or if you do not have the FASTag, then you have to go through the manual process. So now you just tell me which is going to be fast and which is going to be slow. I mean, right? If you are going with the FASTag, definitely within few seconds you can go the toll gate. You can pass the toll gate. But with manual process, you have to stop your car. You have to go to the checking, the officer who is sitting there. You need to make the payment, and that manual process is going to be happening. So in these two cases, which one is going to be faster?
FASTag.
Definitely that FASTag. So if you are having a valid FASTag, so this FASTag here work like a resource filter. If you are having the FASTag and if that is valid, then he can process the request immediately and return the response. No further processing is required. But if your FASTag is invalid or expired or not available, then the remaining steps or manual process is going to be happening, which is definitely going to take more time. So these are some of the real-time scenario of using resource filter. So resource filter means what? If he able to answer your question, he can answer. Otherwise, he can forward that question to the remaining process steps which are available in the request processing pipeline. So let us proceed and understand how to implement this with some real-time scenario, right? Guys, remember, you can create the right resource filter either by by implementing the iResource filter interface or by implementing the iAsync resource filter interface, right? So iAsync means whenever you are going to deal with a asynchronous code, you have to go with this option. If you are dealing with the synchronous code, you have to go with this option. And this iResource filter, right, it is provided with two methods. One is on result executing, and if you are working with asynchronous resource filter, it is provided with this on resource execution. So basically, this on result executing or on result executing async method, these method are going to be execute immediately after the authorization. So once if you have some authorization filter, once those filter are completed their execution, this method will come into the picture and they will execute. Similarly, this on result executed, which is only available with this iResource filter, going to be execute after all other filter complete their execution, like the action filter, exception filter, result filter, action method. Once they all complete their execution before returning the response, this filter will come into the clear. Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Right? Other option is also there. What you need to do, create the custom class inheriting from the attribute class and provide the implementation for any of this iResource or iAsync resource filter. That is fine. So now, so how the request flows? So request received at the server, that is fine. First, the authorization filter will execute. Then the resource filter will execute. Resource filter, if possible, he can return the response. For that purpose, what we need to do, we need to set the context.result property. If the response is not handled by this method, then what he will do, he will forward that request to the remaining right pipeline method, right remaining filters, like some action filter if there, action method is there, exception filter is there, right? And all these things, once the action method execution is completed, then the result filter will execute. And after the result filter, that resource filter on result execute method is going to be execute, right? And guys, remember one more thing, this exception filter, it can only come into the picture, right? This is not mandatory. It is only coming into the picture when there is an unhandled exception, unhandled exception in the layer, whether it is authentication layer, resource filter, action filter, action method, result filter, wherever there is an exception, definitely this exception filter will come into the picture. Right? After result filter, this result filter, this resource filter will come into the picture. This is optional. And once the resource filter on result executed is completed, then only the response returned to the client. So the sequence is first authorization filter, then resource filter. If resource filter handle the response, that is fine. No further processing will be required. Right? If it is not short circuit, right, then model binding will occur. Action filter execution is going to be there. Action method execution is going to be there. Then result filter execution will be there. Then resource filters on response on resource executed. This method is going to be executed after the result filter that is going to execute. Then this response is sent to the client. And this exception filter, it is optional. If any unhandled exception, this filter will come into the picture. Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make I'm going to create three different scenarios to make you understand how to use resource filter, how to use async resource filter, and how to use attribute based resource filter. Right. So each going to be with a different scenario. So let me go ahead and create one new project. Right. So let me go ahead. Let me change the location. So first of all, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use API response with caching. So basically, for example, you are having a weather forecast endpoint that receives thousands of requests, right, every minute for popular cities, right? So once you have access one city information, right, city weather report. So do you think that that city weather is going to be changed frequently in every second and every minute? No. So basically, once we access the city weather report, we can cache that report, right? City's report for for some minutes. Within that time period, if any request comes for the same city, then instead of processing that logic, getting the data from the database or from some external API, we can return the data from the cache, and that's what we can achieve by using one response filter. So API response caching. So we can cache the response of an API, and for that purpose, we can create a resource filter. So let us proceed and create one filter for handling this thing. So first of all, let me go ahead and create a folder called filters. So this is my filter, and this is my weather cache resource filter. Right. See. So as I'm going to store the data in cache, you can use in-memory caching, you can go with the distributed caching, right? All these things we have discussed. So now I'm going with in-memory cache. So basically, I'm going to use this iMemory cache. The cache duration is 60 seconds. So if you want, you can increase that to 600 seconds, right, as per your requirement. How long you want to store this cache data in memory? So as I'm going to use in-memory cache, so I'm initializing that in-memory cache through the constructor. So this method is going to execute when, and this method is going to execute when. So this method, right, runs before the action method execution after authorization, and this method is going to execute after the action method executed, and or you can say after the result filter, right? So this is before executing the action method, and this is going to be after executing the action method. Why I'm saying before and after? Because we have not used any other filter here. If other filters are there, then that sequence of what we have discussed that will come into the picture now. So this method, what I'm doing here, I'm fetching the data from the route, right? So suppose route data. Now, if you want to fetch the data from the core string, then what you need to do? You need to use this logic, right? So instead of route, if you are going to use core string, if you are going to fetch from the header, right? So all this route data dot values is request dot query, request dot header, right? All these things are available, and whichever approach you want, you can access, right? So now, what is my requirement? My requirement is I want to pass the route cities, the city information I want to pass in the route. So that approach I'm using. If you want to use core string, then this approach you need to use. So basically, from the context object, I can access the route data. From the context.http context, right, dot request, I can access the query parameter. So in this case, right, route data dot value. So city property value I'm going to fetch. If available, convert that to string, and then make that to lowercase, right? So basically, whatever the city provided by the user in the route, that city will be converted into lowercase. So next, what I'm checking here, please observe. If the city is null, then what I need to do? I need to return exit, right? I cannot process because you have not provided the city. If the city is available, right? Let assume the valid city, the user is provided one city. Then what I need to do? I need to check whether this city information is already stored in the memory cache. If the city information is already stored in the memory cache, then what I'm doing here, I'm retrieving that corresponding cache data. And also I'm checking if the cache data is not null. If it is null, then I don't want to return. If it is not null, then whatever the data return or whatever the data stored in the cache, that's what I'm going to return by setting the result property. So once you set the result property, you do not need to do anything special. So from here, it will automatically return that response to the client. If you have not set the result property, then what will happen? Now, no cache data found, so it will process to the next component, whichever is registered into the application processing pipeline. Whether it is a filter or whether it is the action method, that is what it is going to execute. Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now, so this is what happening before executing the action method. Now, once the action method is executed, then what we need to do? Then again, we need to retrieve the city data. Definitely, it will be there. Why? Because if the city data is not there, then the request cannot be processed or handled by the framework. So definitely, the city data is going to be there. So that validation, if you want to check, you can check. Then here, what I'm doing, please observe. Now, from the context dot result, if this is a object result, right, from this context dot result, so whatever the result stored, that what I'm accessing on this result properties, and I'm checking whether the status code equals to 200 and the value is not null. So that logic I have written here. So this is the advanced syntax which is available similar to your SQL. So you can use this one or you can write it not equal to null. So that operator you can also use. Otherwise you can use this advanced syntax is not null. So basically whatever the result written by the action method, that result I'm storing inside this object result property. And from there I'm checking whether the status code is 200 and the result of value, I mean some data is it is going to return. So if it is not null, if all these things are satisfied, then what I need to do? Now, whatever the result that value, that is what I'm going to store for this city property. I mean, city is going to be the key in the memory cache. And this objected value, I'm going to store for that city key. And the duration we have already set that it is going to be 60 seconds. Clear?
Yeah.
Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Clear.
Right. So this is the action method. Sorry, not the action method. This is the custom resource filter, which is going to check whether the data is valid. I mean, whether the data is available in the cache. If available, return from the cache, no further processing. If it is not available in the cache, then it will invoke the action method. That action method will execute. That action method will work with the API or database, return the data. So once the data is returned at the time of returning time, It will again check whether the result is 200, result is available, result is not. If everything is fine, then whatever the result written, that what it is going to store on the cache for this particular city key. So for each city, it is going to create a key in the memory cache. The duration is going to be 60 seconds. So within 60 seconds, if you access, then you will get the response from the cache. After 60 seconds, the cache will be expired. So again, it will fetch the data from the database. Clear?
Yes, sir. So
Right.
that root data is available only in resource executing context. That's context class, right, sir?
Sorry.
The root data, like line number 26, context.root data, that route data is only for resource execute context.
You have to remember this context object means it is having access to both the request object and the response object. So if I'm not sure whether you attend my session from the beginning, right? When I start the basic concept of ASP.NET Core, I have mentioned, right? I have discussed context object having access to both the resource, right? I mean, if you have watched my request processing pipeline session, right? When I discussed in the basics, at that time I have discussed the context object having access to both the request object and the response object. So when it is going, at that time it is going to be the request object, and the time of returning, it is the response object. So for
Yes,
the
sir.
you
The,
can access all the information in the sense you can access the action method name, you can have access the path, you can access the query string data, you can access the route data, request body, header, right, everything you can access from this context. Clear?
okay, sir.
Right. I'm also going to discuss, right, the next what I'm going to discuss action filter. At that time, I'm going to discuss how to access the path, URL, everything, how you can access and how you can log. So for now, is that clear?
Yes.
Anyone having any question?
No, sir.
Okay, now API rate limiting with the asynchronous filter. So basically, let's assume you are having one public API, right? Public API means anyone can access. So again, you know that if you are getting too many requests, then it is also going to downgrade your application server. Server resources are going to be down. So sometimes what happens, right? Some website, right? Some other website you can consider your competitor or something like this, and they want to right, downgrade your application performance, right? So for that purpose, what they are going to do is they are going to send 1,000 number of requests at the same time from the single location. So basically, API rate limiting means what? It means, so what is my requirement for from a single IP address, right? From a single IP address, I can only allow maximum 5 requests or 10 requests per seconds per minute, something like this. As per your requirement, you need to decide what is the maximum number of requests from a single IP address per minute. If it exceed more than that, then we should not allow that request to be processed. So that is what my requirement, right? So for this purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a resource filter. So when the when the request comes, this resource filter is going to check for this particular IP address, right? From where the request is coming, what is the IP address? For this IP address, how many requests are already faced in the last 1 minute? If it is exceed the maximum limitation, if it is exceed, okay, I cannot proceed, I can return this 429 too many request error message the client. No, it is not rate limited. I mean, it is coming right for the first time, second time. That means whatever the limitation we have set, that is not right. I mean, exit till now. Okay, fine. Let's proceed and execute that request. So that is what my requirement. That is API rate limit. So for this purpose, I'm going to create a filter, right? So this is one of the important question, guys. Remember, right? For example, if you are giving the interviewer might be ask you, right? Suppose I'm having one API endpoint, and my requirement is that from a particular device or from a particular IP address, maximum 5 requests is allowed per minute. After 5 requests per minute, within the 1 minute, if you try to access more than 5, It should not be allowed. It should return some error message indicating too many requests. So this is also one of the interview questions. So what will be your answer? So in that case, you can tell, yes, that is fine. So we can create one resource filter. That resource filter, when the request received, it will check how many requests are being processed in the last 1 minute. And if it exceeds that limitation or not, if it exceeds, so from there only we can return the response instead of processing that request. So that is also one of the interview questions. So now let me proceed and see how we can implement this. So guys, you understand what is your requirement?
Yes.
Right? And guys, remember, every example, whatever I'm going to give, it is based on a, right, what I can say, a real-time scenario, right? For example, that banking application, what we discussed, right, 6 to 9 p.m. So that is also one of the real-time. So API caching, so completely response we are going to cache it. This is also one of the real-time scenario, right? So basically, right, understanding the concept is fine, but if you don't know how to use that concept in real time, not see. So what I'm doing here, I'm using memory cache. So I'm using maximum request per minute is 5. So if you are providing, right, if you are sending more than 5 requests, after 5, from the 6th request onward, it will not process. So now what I'm doing here. So first of all, as I have already discussed, so using this context object, I can access everything. And right here, you can see this is my next delegate. So this is my next delegate. And can anybody tell me what is the use of a next delegate? When I invoke this next delegate, what will happen? So in that case, what is the next right middleware component that is going to be executed? Or the whatever the next middleware component or filter, whatever registered into your request processing pipeline, that is going to be executed when we invoke this next request delegate. And for this purpose, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this asynchronous filter, right? So here you can see it is taking two parameter, context object and next delegate. So using context object, we can do the validation. Using next object, we can invoke the next middleware components, right? Now, see. So this is my IP address. I'm getting that HTTP context data connection dot remote IP address. So whatever the IP address for local host, it is going to be colon one, something like this. In real time, whatever the IP address, that what you will get, right? So now what I'm doing here, now I'm creating one key. So remote limit underscore IP. So whatever the IP address, by taking that IP address, I'm creating a key, right? And initially request count, you can see, right, from the cache, right? So this is my cache. From this cache, I'm converting that into a nullable integer type. From that cache, I'm fetching that request count. If it is coming for the first time, definitely it will return null. In that case, I'm setting that value to 0. If it is available, right, if some data is available like 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, that value it is going to return, and that value I'm going to store here. Then I need to check whether this request count is greater than equals to maximum request per minute, what we said here. If it is greater than equals to 5, then we should not process that request. Instead, we need to return some error message like 404429, too many error requests, and whatever the error response, that what we need to set as the result property. And from here, we need to return. So once I call this return, that means it is going to short circuit. And from here, it will see if you are not calling this one, that is also fine. So, right, but as we are using this asynchronous version, so you have to call that return or you have to call this next. Say if you are working with iResourceFilter, so no need to call that return statement because there is no option to call the next delegate. So here we are having this return statement. Why? Because of the next delegate. So return statement means no further processing. From here, it will return the response to the client. If this limitation is not set, then what we need to do? Now we need to update the request count. So whatever the current request count, either 0 or whatever the data it is already stored, plus 1, the duration is going to be 1. Clear?
Yes.
And then we need to call the next method, which is going to execute the next delegate, which is available in the request processing pipeline. So next, what I'm going to do is API key validation and early request rejection. So basically what happens, now whenever some request you are receiving, that request for processing the request, you might be making it mandatory, some of the keys to be available, right? Some of the header needs to be present in the request. If such header are missing, then you should not process that request. So you should return some error message early. So basically, it is advisable to reject the request as early as possible if there is some issue. If no issue, that is fine. But if there is some issue, then as soon as possible, return the response, all right, with the error information. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to make sure whenever the request comes, we should have one mandatory header. So that mandatory header, if present, that is fine. If not present, then we should not process. Let's assume, right, we have developed one API, and that API is going to be used by multiple clients. For each client, we are provided some kind of information. So if that header is missing, means this is not coming from a trusted client. So we should not process that request, right? So how we can implement this? Let us try to observe. So basically, I'm going to create one method, that is API key validation attribute. And this is going to be an attribute, right? So we have discussed two examples using synchronous and asynchronous. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this attribute. So here you can see this is inherited from the attribute class. See, there is no resource filter attribute. So we can inherit from the base attribute class. And this is my iResource filter. So now what is my requirement? My requirement is each request should have this X API key. Each request means wherever I apply this attribute, for that endpoint, it is mandatory to have this API key in the request header. So now within the on executing method, so you can see, first of all, I'm fetching all the headers. So within this list of header, this header is available or not. If available, then we are extracting that header key, right? And if available, that is fine. And in that case, what I'm doing here, please observe, right? If not available, I'm returning this error message to the client that this API key is missing. And as in this case, as I'm executing this resource filter, so it is having two methods, on result executing, on result executed. So we need to check this thing inside the on result executing method. But as you know, if you are implementing an interface, then it is mandatory to provide the implementation for all interface method. So even though this method is not required in our case, we have to provide a right default implementation. Clear? Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. So these are the three different filters that what we have created for three different scenarios. Now, what I need to do, I need to register the memory cache. So let me go ahead because we are using it in memory. So we need to register the memory cache. So how we can do this? See, this is my memory cache services. So basically, we are in adding that memory cache into the dependency injection container, so that right the framework will handle right the memory cache instance. So he will provide the instance, and for that purpose you need to enable, you need to register memory cache into the dependency injection container. Now what I am doing also here, you can see, I'm going to show you another approach. See, if you are using a type filter, then you do not need to register these services, right? So here I'm registering this weather cache resource filter rate limiting filter like this. But if you are going to use service, right, if you are going to register this filter using type filter, this is not required. So let it be there. I will show you different approaches. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create weather controller. So let me go ahead and create a controller. So this is going to my weather controller. And this controller is going to have different endpoints to show different use cases of these filters. So let me go ahead and see. So this is my API key validation resource filter, right? So attribute. So this is my attribute which I applied at the controller level. That means what? That means within this controller, whatever all action method we define, For all these action method, right, to be executed successfully, the request should have a custom key with this name. If this key is missing, that means that request is going to be rejected by this attribute or this resource filter attribute. Clear? Yes or
Yes.
no? Right. Now, so this is my right, guys. Remember, in previous example, I have shown you how to use type filter. Okay. So if you want to use another approach, that is service filter, then first of all you need to register that service into the program class, right? For example, let assume I want to execute this weather cache resource filter using service filter attribute, and a rate limiting filter I want to use using type filter, right? So service filter, whenever you are going to use service filter, mandatory you have to use this what I can say. What is this, guys? This registration, right? Now, so here I have applied my weather cache resource filter. Now, this is my rate limiting. And now for rate limiting, what I want to use, I want to use a type filter. So I specify type filter. So whenever I'm using a type filter, it is not mandatory to register that filter into the program class. But for the service filter, it is mandatory, right? Why it is mandatory? Why not mandatory? What is the benefit? All these things we will discuss in a different session between service filter and a type filter attribute. For now, just remember, if I'm going with a type filter, no need to register that filter into the program class. If I'm going with a service filter, then it is mandatory to register that filter into the service class. So here, whether cache resource filter is registered, so I can apply service filter. Rate limiting filter is not registered into the program.cs class file, so I have to use type filter. So in this case, this method, you can see I have not applied any filter attribute. Means what? Means this is only this is applicable. Clear? Right?
Yes, sir.
Right? If you want to apply this rate limiting filter here, then also you can apply, right? For example, uh, rate limiting filter. So that what I have applied here, right? Means a maximum of 5 requests you can handle. So now with these changes, let me run the application and see whether it is working fine or not. Okay. So this is my weather forecast. So for this weather forecast, I have applied this rate weather cache resource filter. So when I execute for the first time, so definitely it is going to fetch the data from the database by executing this action method. But from the second time onwards, you will see this is not going to be executed. Why? From the second time onwards, it is going to return the data from the cache. So let us proceed and see. So let's give the city as BBSR. Right. So now when I execute, definitely I will get 401 error. What error? Now unauthorized API key is missing. So basically, if you remember this API key filter attribute we have applied at the top, means for each request that key is mandatory. So what I'm going to do, right? If you see, I'm accessing this, I'm getting this. Now, if I'm passing this X API key, then it should process. See, it processed the request and we got the response. Now what I need to do is, if I'm going to access the same API multiple times, then it will not hit the action method multiple times. It will return the data from the cache. Who will handle this thing? The response skills. See, I'm getting the response. See, the action method is not actually clear. The first endpoint is clear. Clear that validation is there and that caching is there. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. So get right weather forecast endpoint. So here we have applied that weather cache. So cache is there. Rate limiting is also there. So as we are applying that cache filter, it will not work as expected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this one. So open filter, open city. Right. So in this case, what will happen? Now, after 5 times when he access For the next time, I should get that rate limiting error. So not found. Why not found? Okay. See, I'm getting the data. I'm getting the data. See, too many requests. That means the API key validation is there, caching is working, rate limiting is also working. Clear? Or
Yes.
anyone having any question? When to use resource filter? How to use resource filter? What are the different ways to use resource filter? Layman example as well as a real-time scenario. Clear, guys?
Can I have a
Yes.
question?
Yes, yes, please.
We have registered the service filter in the program class, but here, by using the scoped object, here we are not doing any IO bound operations. Then why you are registered with the scoped
See,
object?
see, first of all, you have to remember, right? This add scope and whatever you are talking here we are using right weather cache resource filter. See, I just use this add scope. You can go with the transient. You can go with right add singleton. It is up to you only,
Okay.
right? So for time being, for this demonstration, I'm not using any database operation. But what is my objective? My objective is to make you understand how to work with right uh, different types of a filter. I mean asynchronous filter and the synchronous version, right? And for this part, registration part, I'm not going to discuss right this registration part here. So you know what is the best approach to register the services. If it is dealing with the database, for example, I'm using, so for example, if you look at this one, currently I'm using this iasync resource filter. So if I'm using this iasync resource filter means it is a asynchronous filter. So asynchronous filter means it might be dealing with some database. So if it is dealing with the database, then I have to register this using add scope. That doesn't mean currently I'm not using any database kind of activity here. That doesn't mean right, you will not use. If you want, you can use. Right, it is up to you only. But what is your requirement is so. In today's session, my main agenda is not to explain how it is registered. Even though if you don't register this thing, then also it is going to work. Right? For that purpose, what you need to do instead of a service filter, you have to use here type filter. So that is the reason why I have right. I have told from the beginning. Right? I'm not going to discuss what is the type filter, what is service filter, how it is working. Right? So that is what I'm not going to discuss. So you should know what is the best option because we have taken right one session to make you understand, and I'm not going to keep focus on that part again and again. Clear?
Okay.
Right? So you can see that is the reason why, right? I have already told what is the use of a type filter, what is the use of a service filter, how to register this type filter, how to register this service filter, right? Why? So these things I have already told. I'm not going to discuss today. And whatever your question related to this is related to the service. I mean related to the filter registration, and this part we will discuss in depth, right? So
Okay.
what is the best
Thank
way to register, how to register, when to register, why service filter, why type filter, when to use service filter over type filter, when to use type filter over service filter, how that instance is going to be managed with the type filter, how the filter instance is going to be managed with the service filter, right? All these things we are going to discuss in depth. So for time being, I'm not giving focus to this one. Clear?
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone having any more question, guys? So the last thing for today's session is action filter. So let us proceed and discuss what are action filters. See, action filter means what? Now, if you want to execute some custom logic before executing the action method, after the what I can say authorization filter, resource filter, then only that action filter will come into the picture before executing the action method. Similarly, after executing the action method, if you want to execute some logic, right, that is coming before the result filter and before the resource filter, then in that scenario, you need to use action filter. So action filter provide us with the approach, or it provide us to inject some kind of some piece of a custom code which is going to be executed before the action execution and after the action execution. So there are two ways, which allows us to execute some pre-processing logic and some post-processing logic, right? So let us understand this with some scenario, right? For example, if you go to a hotel, right? If you go to some restaurant, so before the order, your job is different, and after the order, your job is going to be different. The same filter here, the waiter is the action filter. So before the meal, right, it will take the order, it will check the preferences, right? It will ask you what is your requirement, reservation, all these things. So once you have done your meal, then again the same waiter will come, but that task is going to be different. What is the task? So it will take the bill, it will ask for the feedback, it will offer you some kind of a dessert. That means the same action filter, but the same people, list of people, but that the task is going to be changed, right, based on the situation. So before what, after what. Similarly, before executing the action method, if you want to execute something, and after executing the action method, if you want to execute something, then for that purpose, you need action filter, right? For example, this is another example, right? So if you are, suppose you are going with an e-commerce website and you want to place some order. So if you want to place the order, then your cart should not be empty. If your cart is empty, you cannot place the order. And at the same time, after placing the order, you will get this information that your order is confirmed. So basically, before placing the order, what are the things you need to check? Your cart should not be empty. Whatever items you selected, the available stocks must be there. You have to make the payment. So once your payment is confirmed, you will get that intimation your order is confirmed. You will get one email specifying that your order is confirmed. Your order will be received in so and so. That means, so there are the two different types of scenarios. One, what I need to do before doing the operation. Another, what I need to do after doing the operation. And for this particular type of war, right, what we need to do, we need to go with the action builder. Clear?
Yes.
Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Right. And when the action filter is going to execute, first filter is authorization filter, second one is resource filter, third one is action filter. Action filter, again, they provided two methods. One is on action executing, another one is on action executed. So on action executing is going to execute before the action method execution. On action executed is going to execute after the action method execution. So if you are going with the I action filter, we need to use these two methods. If you are going with the asynchronous version, then you have to use this method, right? So this is the only method that is provided by asynchronous filter. Other option is also available. What is that? That option is you can use also action filter attribute. So along with the action filter attribute, you have to use either I action filter or I asynchronous filter. So let us proceed and understand this thing practically. Right. So what I'm going to do is I will show you, right, different real-time scenarios so that you will get better clarity. So first of all, what I need to do, I need to create a new project. So action filter demo, I have, sorry. So I have created one project action filter demo. So to the same existing solution, right? So that is the older one, action resource filter demo is done. So now we need to make this project as our startup project. So how to make? So this is going to my startup project. So let me close all other tabs. Okay. So now we need to work with this project, right? So now, So let us first of all create a folder called filters as the project root directory, where we will create all our action filters. Okay. So now what is my requirement? Now my requirement is we need to capture both the incoming request parameters and the outgoing response details for every API call. So for the audit purpose, what is my requirement? Now whenever the request comes, whatever the query string data, whatever the route data, whatever the header information, and whenever we return the response back to the client, whatever the data we return. So everything we need to log. So for this purpose, what I can do is, right, I can create one action filter. That action filter is going to execute before executing the action method, so that we can store the query string, route data, header information, all these things. And once the action method is processed, whatever the response it will return, that response also we are going to store into the log file. And this is for the audit purpose, so that we can debug the request, right? We can see what information we are getting, what response we are returning, whether the data is correct. Sorry. So that what we need to check. So for this purpose, what we need to do, we need to create one action filter. So the first example is request and the response logging. So whatever the request coming and whatever the response we are returning, so that what we need to log. And for this purpose, we are going to create a action filter. And this example, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to use I action filter interface, right? So this is my I action filter interface. I'm going to use the logger. The logger configuration is already there. So this is log level information and warning. And by default, the log is going to be the default logger, which is going to be your, right? What I can say, the default one is going to be your console as well as your debug. So in the console window, I'll show you the log. But if you want to configure, if you are configuring the log to be stored in the text file, if you are configuring the log to be stored in the database, that is fine. So you have already know how to implement those things. So for now, what I'm going to show you is how to log the data into the log, right, console log. So this is my logger instance I have initialized, and this is my on action executing. So basically here we have two methods. One is on action executing and another one is on action executing. This on action executing method is going to execute before executing the action method, and this will execute after executing the action method. So let's see. So first of all, from this context object, I access the HTTP context object. So from this request context object, I'm accessing the request object. Similarly, HTTP context dot response is nothing but give you the response, like context dot response. So that what it is going to return response. If you are accessing the request object, it will give the request. So now what data I want to fetch? I want to fetch all the query string parameter. So request dot query string. I want to fetch all the route data, context dot route data dot values. I want to fetch all the header, that is called request dot header. In this case, you cannot access the right. Yeah, everything you can access. There is nothing right to be worried. So here you can see what I'm doing. I'm specifying what is the request method, what is the request path, right? I mean, see, these are the request data, query string data, route data header. But along this, which method you are being accessed, what is the URL path, right? All these things I have access here, right? The query parameter, route data header, everything I'm logging into the logger. So next one is once the action method executed. So this is my response, and whatever the response status code, that what I'm going to log. So if you want to log the response body, that is also fine, but doesn't matter here, right? Because of the security reason. Security reason means complete response message, right? Complete response you want to store, then you have to log this one. But here I'm fine with this status code. So if you want, you can also log this complete response. So clear? Clear
Yes,
or
sir.
not? Right? So that completely response I'm logging, right? Uh, okay, fine. So next what I'm going to do is I want to do input validation before executing the asynchronous filter, right? See, most of the time what happens, now most of the time we can use data annotation for the validation. But some complex validation, right? Ideally, we never use this action filter for purpose of validation. So, but yes, sometimes if you need some complex validation, which is not difficult, right, which is not easy to handle using the built-in API controller attribute, then in that case, you can go with the complex validation. You can create one action filter, which is going to validate the data. For example, we are going to have two fields. One is start date, one is end date. And we want to validate both field must be exist. Both fields must be of date time type values, and start date should be later than the right if I mean the end date should be greater than the start date. If these validations are not satisfied, then what we need to do is we need to return 400 error message, right? So for this purpose, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this complex validator attribute. So this time I'm going to show you how to use the asynchronous validation. See, so this is not the ideal scenario for asynchronous validation. Asynchronous validation only will come into the picture whenever you are doing some IO operation. But yes, I'm just trying to show you how to use this thing, right? See, so in this case, I'm using this asynchronous action filter, having this method. This will give you the context object. I mean, all the input request object and parameter details. And this next delegate basically going to invoke the next middleware component, which is registered into the application pipeline. So basically, if this method, I mean, if there is no validation issue, then we need to call the next delegate. If there is some validation issues, then we need to short circuit the request processing pipeline and we need to return 400 with error message. So first of all, what I'm trying to do is, so context dot arguments dot try get value. So whatever the parameter we are getting for the start date, whatever the parameter we are getting for the action date. So for the start date and the action date, we need to access their value. So in this case, doesn't matter, right, where this data is coming, whether it is coming in the route, whether it is coming in the core string, or whether it is coming in the request body. From everywhere, it will check and it will figure out whether this data is available or not. If both this data is available, right, then this start date that is will be stored inside the start date object. If end date is available, then that will be stored inside this end data object. So here, the data type is going to be object type. So once object data type, and if both are available, then it will check the third condition. So what is the third condition? We need to convert that data type to date time and end object to also date time. And if both are available and both are present, then this condition is also going to be satisfied. So basically, the start date must be there, the end date must be there, the start date must be converted to date time, the end date must be converted to date time. If any of the validation fail, then it will right what I can say, it will not come, right? So it will come inside. So now inside what I'm doing here, please observe, right? So inside I'm checking the start date and end date. If start date is greater than end date, then what will happen? Right? If start date is greater than end date, then what will happen? Now, in that case, we need to return this error message. And otherwise, what we need to do, we need to call the next middleware component. Clear?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
If you are not providing start date and end date, no fine, not issue, we are not checking. But if you are providing start date and end date, then it should be this. Right? So now, let's see, this is just an example, right? And you know better, right, what are the things you need to do and how to do. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a API response wrapper. Wrapper means what? Now, whenever there is some issue, right, whenever I'm returning the response, all the response should be written in a specific format. So all the response should return in a specific format. So for that purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one action filter. So after processing the response, once the action method execute, then that response, it will format into a specific type. So for that purpose, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this API response wrapper filter. So let me go ahead and create a class file. Okay. Right. So in this case, I'm right using this authorized filter attribute, and this authorized filter attribute provide multiple method. And here you can say on action executing, on action executed, on result executed, on result executing. See, this result means this three method is related to result filter, and this three method is related to our action filter. So these three method you need to use. So before executing, after executing, if you are doing the operation in a asynchronous manner. Again, these are virtual method means overriding is optional. So if you want, you can override. If you don't want, then you should not override. So, and in this case, in my scenario, so what I need? So in my scenario, I want to format the response. Response means definitely I have to use this on action executing. Why? Because this is the method which is going to be execute after the action method. So this method will not execute after the action method, and this method is not going to be execute after the action method. So definitely I have to use this one. Clear why I'm going to use action on action, sorry, on action executed. So this is the method what I need to use. Clear? Why? Is that clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Right. So that is what I'm doing here on action executed. So this executed method is going to execute after the action method. So basically in the context result, I'm converting that result into an object result, and whatever the object result, right, I'm creating one response, right? What response? Now object result at status code, whatever provided is provided, if not provided, non-red. Message is going to be success. Data is going to be object result dot value. So whatever the data written by the right action method, that data message status. So these are the things that what I need to return. And then once you have the wrapped response, this wrapped response we need to set in the result property, and right JSON result property, and specify the status code, whatever the status code right you got from the right what I can say from the action. Again, if this object result is fine, but if there is no data to be returned, empty result. So in case of an empty result, what we need to do, we need to also check the status code as 204. There is no content, data null as an object. So data is going to be null. And that what we need to return. Other than this, right, if there is no data and if there is a empty result or bad request and other things, I'm not bothering. So if you want, you can also handle this thing, right? So for now, we are handling only these two things, and then I'm calling the base class on executed method. So as it is override method, so if you want, you can also call the base class on executed method. If you are not calling, that is also fine. So this is going to my API response filter. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another filter that is measuring time of measuring execution time of specific end. So basically, what is my requirement? My requirement is to check, right? My requirement is to check when one action method execute, how much time it takes, right? What is the when it start, when it end, what is the total duration for each action method execution, and that timing, right? That right the execution time measuring, I want to store. So for this purpose, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another filter that is execution time logging filter. So let me go ahead and create the class file. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to use asynchronous version. So again, it is going to be attribute. So action filter attribute. And you can see I'm using the stopwatch. Logger is also there, which is going to log the data on action execution. So this is, I'm starting the stopwatch. And once I start the stopwatch, I call the next method. So this next method is means what? Now it is going to call the action method. So once the action method execution is completed, then only it will come here. Why? Because we are using await keyword. So once the action method is execution completed, we are stopping the stopwatch by calling the stop method. And here, what is the action method name? That what I am retrieving. And here I'm printing this execution time for this action method is not milliseconds, right? So this is going to be my fourth middleware component. Now, what I need to do, I need to create a demo controller and showing the use of all these action filters. So let me go ahead, create a class file. So this is going to my controller class. Here you can see it's a log request response time. So here you can see I have used type filter and this is my request response. So basically whatever the input request and response, that is going to be log. Validate input demo. So basically here I'm taking two input date time from the query string, right? You can see from query. So this date and date, start date and end date validation is going to be handled by this filter. Standardized response demo. So basically here you can see API response. So here this is the data what I'm returning, but this data will be formatized, right? What is the status code, message, data, right? It's going to be formatized in a specific, right? What I can say format. For that purpose I'm using this one. And execution logging time. So basically what is the duration it took to start the execution and end the execution, that what I'm going to log. And here as this is not an asynchronous method, so what I'm using thread.sleep to make this sleep for 500 milliseconds. So this is my method. So next what I need to do, I need to configure my program class too. Okay, let me go ahead. So this is going to be my program class. So let me go ahead and register to disable camel cache naming convention, right? So now what I need to do, I need to run the application and see whether it is working as expected or not. See log request and response. So currently you can see there is no, right, what I can say parameter. Now what I am going to do is I'm passing some sample parameter test. See request and response logged successfully. See, you can see. So ActionFilter demo. So this is the request coming, method get, path this one, core string is this one, route data is this one. See, everything is written and response, outgoing response, what is the status code? It is also printing. That means this method is working. Clear? Right? For example, standardized response format. So there is another method, standardized response format. And here I'm going to check. See, from the action method, I'm returning value and description using a JSON object. But what data I'm getting here? I'm getting a proper response status, message, data, value and a description. Clear? Yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
This is another method where I want to print the time it took to execute, right? So here you can see execution time for the action filter demo controllers folder, demo controller, execution time demo, that action method, right? It took 506 milliseconds to complete, right? So another one is also there, that validate input. So let me go ahead and provide the start and end date. So what I'm going to do, so this is my start date, this is my end date. See, input validation successfully and this. So now what I'm going to do is start date is 25. See, start date cannot be later than the end date. That validation is also working. So if you want to execute something before the action method execution and after the action method execution, then you can go with the action filter. Clear?
Yes, clear.
So this is all about these three filters. Two remaining filters are there. That is result filter and exception filter. And along with result and exception filter, we are also going to discuss the difference between type filter and service filter tomorrow. Clear?
Yes.
Anyone
Yes.
having any?
Yes, sir.
So guys, you guys are understanding now the clarity. Clarity it means when which filter is going to be executed, what is the sequence, how red filter execution is happening. That is more important. And also it is very important to understand when to use which filter, how to use which filter, what are the different real-time scenarios. That is what we also need to understand. Okay. Anyone having any more question, guys?
No question.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.